Hi, I'm Helmut Licht. Thank you for joining me for this video on secondary house meanings. Let's get started. Here is a very basic chart. Since we are only discussing the houses, I'm not showing any signs, any degree areas, any planets, only the houses. And in a basic chart, the first house is always right here, the second house is here, third house is right here, and all the way around the circle. The first house signifies me personally, my body, my physical appearance, and so on. The second house rules my finances, and this is very rough and very basic. It has more things it rules, but right now I'm just showing you some basics. The third house rules the way I communicate. It also rules, for instance, neighbors. The fourth house rules my family, my home. The fifth house rules any children that I have. Now, if I don't have any neighbors, then the third house means nothing in that respect to me. If I don't have any children, which is the fifth house, then the fifth house means nothing with respect to children. You understand? Only when I have children, then does the children meaning become active in the fifth house. Only when I have a neighbor does the third house become active with respect to the neighbor. If I am not married and have no partner, then the seventh house does not have that meaning with it. However, if I am married and I have a wife, then suddenly the seventh house becomes active. And I can, to a certain extent, see my wife through that seventh house and any planets in it and any aspects made to it. I'm assuming that all of you watching this video know the basics of astrology, such as planets, signs, and house meanings. Assuming that this is my chart, then the houses in red are the primary houses. Now, I have lived in my house since 1976. I've had neighbors all along, but I have never had any astrological interest in them. Therefore, I've never thought about my neighbors with respect to my chart. However, something happened last summer. A house next to me had been vacant for about 2 years, and suddenly 2 young people, a married couple, purchased the house. And by them doing that, my third house, which rules neighbors, has suddenly become active, which means, to a certain extent, I can now see them astrologically speaking through my chart. I do not have their astrological information. I do not know when they were born. I have no idea. I just am able to see them through my chart in a limited way, but I will be able to see them. And here's how this happens. The third house in my chart rules neighbors. That means that the third house becomes my neighbor's first house, because the first house rules the owner of the secondary chart, which is my neighbor. Well, shortly after I met them last summer, they both came and knocked on my door, and then she said, "I have some good news for you." And before she even told me, I could tell by the look in her eyes what she was going to tell me, and she did. She said, "I'm expecting a baby." I was very happy for them, congratulated them, and at that particular moment, when she became aware that she was going to have a baby, her fifth house became active. And here is where it becomes very, very exciting, astrologically speaking. Remember now that her fifth house corresponds to my seventh house. And I am seeing her fifth house through my seventh house. Always remember that, because my chart is the primary chart. So there has to be something activated in my seventh house in order for her fifth house to be activated. It's the same house. Her fifth house corresponds to my seventh house. So now we have to go into actual astrology and see whether there's anything in my horoscope, my chart, that would activate my seventh house and thereby activate my neighbor's fifth house. Thus, from here on, when I am speaking about my seventh house, I'm really thinking about my neighbor's fifth house as seen through my chart. I'm the primary chart, and her chart is the secondary chart. Here is my birth chart, and I'm using a software called Intrepid. And there's a reason. I have WinStar, I have SolarFire, I have all the other programs, but for this particular video I decided to use Intrepid. So the first thing we have to do, we're going to take this one step at a time. Remember now, my seventh house corresponds to my neighbor's fifth house of children. So we have to now look at my seventh house and find the ruler or rulers. Well, Taurus is on the seventh house cusp. That makes Venus the ruler of the seventh house, and the moon is natally in my seventh house. So that makes the moon the co-ruler. So we have two rulers, Venus and the moon. Now, I talked to my neighbor about 3 days ago, and I asked her, is there an estimated time for the baby to be born? And she says, well, what we are so far is June the 14th. So we have, as far as I'm concerned, we have a pretty exact day. And what we can do now is we can progress this chart. And here's the progress chart right here. So the first thing we do is we have to find out, is there a progressed aspect involving Venus and the moon? Let's see what we have here. Over here we have progressed Venus at 8 Scorpio 16, and it is forming an exact trine to my natal Mercury at 8:57. So yes, the progressed Venus is forming an aspect, which means something having to do with the seventh house is going to happen. There's also another aspect. Progressed Venus is squaring natal Venus. So we have two major progressed aspects involving Venus, the ruler of the seventh. Looking at the moon is in the seventh house, the progressed moon, reinforcing that something will happen in having to do with the seventh house. Furthermore, the progressed moon is forming an exact square to natal Jupiter. So here we have two aspects by progressed Venus, and we have one aspect by progressed moon. Both rulers of the seventh house are involved actively in progressed aspects. A quick side note, ordinarily I would not consider a progressed aspect by the progressed moon to be strong enough by itself to attract any major event. But since we do have a progressed aspect involving Venus, 2 of them, I then do consider the moon's progressed aspect as additional energy. Just want to make that clear. So now this covers the major progressed aspects. Major progressed means 1 day after birth corresponds to 1 year after birth. We also have to consider the minor progressed aspects. Minor progressions mean 1 month after birth corresponds to 1 year after birth. Because of time limitations, I will now create a 3rd ring showing the minor progressions and look for only 1 aspect to our significators, which means the rulers of the 7th house. The inner ring are the natal planets, the outer ring are the progressed planets, and I will now add a 3rd ring, Control E, and stipulate that the outer ring, the 3rd ring, will be minor progressions. And here they are. And just very quickly, I see right away Pluto at 7 Leo 55 is forming a square to progressed Venus at 8 Scorpio 16. We have 1 minor progressed aspect to satisfy the requirement. And we have to do 1 more thing now. We have to bring in the transits, because for any major event to occur, there has to be a major progressed aspect, reinforced by a minor progressed aspect, triggered by a transit. I'm going to rename the outer ring, which is presently minor progressions, and rename them to transits. I can see right away that transiting Venus in the 7th house, my 7th house, which signifies the neighbor's 5th house of children, is forming an aspect to progressed Venus at 8 Scorpio 16. So we have all 4 requirements. We have a major progressed aspect, at least 1. We have minor progressed aspect, at least 1. And we have a transiting aspect, at least 1 right now, to satisfy the requirement that a major event having to do with my 7th, which signifies the neighbor's 5th house of children, is going to happen somewhere around June the 15th. There is an old axiom or law which states something like, as above, so below, and as below, so above. I would now widen this a little bit and also state, as in my chart, so in the secondary chart, and vice versa. As in the secondary chart, so in my chart. We have now discussed my neighbor's 5th house and the fact that there will be something happening in June having to do with the 5th house, which is children, in their case. But there should be something happening in my life also having to do with the 7th house and some kind of birth. Because of time limitations, I cannot discuss this now. I will conclude this video, but follow up with a very brief video to show you how this also reflects in my 7th house, hopefully. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Have a great day and keep astrologing.